All right, thank you for staying with us on Citizen Weekend. And we get into the conversation on the DRC Rwanda Peace Accords that were signed in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, and mediated by President Donald Trump of the United States. Let's begin by listening in to some of the statements made at the ceremony.
We have seen countless mediations and efforts, but none has succeeded in resolving the underlying issues. President Trump introduced a new and effective dynamism that created the space for breakthroughs. His approach is even-handed, never taking sides. He orients us toward the future, not the past, emphasizing that the dividend of peace is prosperity and investment, including from the United States.
The Washington agreements are not yet another document. These represent a turning point. The Democratic Republic of Congo takes this solemn commitment to implement with complete sincerity all of our obligations that stem from this agreement. We do hope that thanks with the same seriousness that the Republic of Rwanda will also respect fully the letter and the spirit of the commitments made here in Washington.
And we'll be involved with sending some of our biggest and greatest companies over to the two countries. And we're going to take out some of the rare earth and take out some of the assets and pay, and everybody's going to make a lot of money.
As we celebrate progress in the DRC, we must not look away from other crises. I want to ask you respectfully, Mr. President, that in your quest for global peace, to support efforts to resolve the humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan.
All right, as promised, I'm joined by Professor Noah Midamba in studio. We also have joining us from Addis, Ethiopia, and that is none other than Jason Stearns, who is an associate professor of international relations. He was coordinator of a UN group of experts to the DRC. He's worked there for a number of years, as well as penned 2 books on that particular crisis. I'll start with you, Jason. First of all, thank you for joining us, and good evening. Can you hear me?
I can hear you okay.
Loud and clear.
Not great.
Fantastic. We had some challenges last week. I just wanted to make sure you could hear me. So I'll start with this. As much as there was a lot of optimism expressed in those statements we just listened to, I'm looking at one of the dailies, and this was their observation that there was palpable tension between the two Great Lakes leaders, and it left a lot to be desired. Tshisekedi and Kagame, they observed, shook hands with Trump separately and barely looked at each other in the 60-minute ceremony, signaling the lingering personal and national tensions rooted in the ongoing war in the eastern DRC. How optimistic should we be? In your view, was this signing of these accords a turning point in the conflict?
Well, I'm not sure how optimistic we can be. I think the first point that's important to point out is that this deal that was signed in Washington was actually already signed in June of this year by the foreign ministers. So it's not a new deal. The importance of the Washington signing really was that Trump himself was involved and that the heads of states were there. So in terms of the substance, this is not a new deal. It was more a ceremonial occasion to get all of the key actors together in a room and to get Donald Trump personally involved and invested in this. I think that's the most important thing that happened in Washington on this week, as well as the economic deal, what's called the Regional Economic Integration Framework. So that is relatively new, but I think the most important thing was the show that was put on and the ceremony was put on and the people who attended, not actually the substance of the deal. And as you pointed out, the two presidents don't get along terribly well. There are a lot of issues that remain to be resolved. I think this is the beginning of a peace process, certainly not the end of a peace process. Fighting carries on in the Eastern DRC. And so this is, I think, just an occasion to bring people together and not actually an end to anything.
All right. Professor Midaba, do you share that view?
I concur. Yes, I think people should not be focusing on externalities. People need to focus on the fundamental outcome and the potential for this to have what's called gravitate, that it can be future, and then, people come slowly to believe, yes, it's working. And I think this deal, like Jason just said, is backed by Trump. It is backed by United States. And the issue is that people need to understand the U.S. is the most powerful country in the world, militarily and economically. And it is estimated that the U.S. can take 2.5 hours to eliminate both Russia, China, and North Korea right now. We don't know what will happen tomorrow because China is arming itself very fast. We don't want that fight to happen on the soil of Africa. Millions of people will die. And therefore, we need to do everything to stop it. And the other thing that this is really not a new approach, but it goes along with Julius Nyerere concept right from the beginning, which is let's not unite Africa because we're very divided, Anglophone, Lusophone, Francophone, and then tribes and everything on top. So he said, let's divide, let's begin with the region. Let's unite the East Africa community, the Southern Africa, the West Africa, the North Africa. Then we can talk about bringing unity together.
Okay.
That's the reason how United States came together.
All right.
They were independent countries.
Yeah, the states.
The states.
All right. So I'll bring in Jason at this point. So one of the reports we've aired tonight is that there were clashes and in Eastern DRC. And of course, there are the exchanges of who's responsible. So the fighting took place, let me see, also took place in areas of Katogota, surrounding hills such as Lubarika and Kaziba. So are we getting ahead of ourselves for those who expected after the signing of these accords? Like you said, the original signing was done in June. Are we getting ahead of ourselves by expecting that the fighting will cease overnight?
If I understood you correctly, you're asking why the fighting is escalating at the moment in the Eastern DRC? So I think one has to remember there is not one peace process here, but two peace processes. It's somewhat complicated. You have what's called the Washington process. That's what we saw just now on the screens, Trump, Kagame, and Tshisekedi. That is a peace process between two countries, Rwanda and the DRC. Then there is a Doha process being facilitated by Qatar in between the DRC and the M23 rebellion that is backed by Rwanda, but Rwanda is not in Doha, it's the M23 and the Congolese government. And so the one interpretation of the fighting on the ground is the M23 reminding everybody that whatever is signed in Washington has no bearing on their own struggle because they haven't signed anything. Or they haven't signed, certainly are not bound by what's being signed in Washington. So I think on the one hand, the M23 is flexing its muscles because the peace talks in Doha at the moment are stalled and they're seeking to get the Congolese government to comply with their demands. So I think that that is the most likely reason for that. Paradoxically, however, the M23 is being backed by the Rwandan government, and there are credible reports of Rwandan troops and artillery on the ground in the fighting that you just mentioned in South Kivu province of the Eastern DRC. And so even as you see these scenes on your television of Kagame signing a document committing to peace, his troops are engaging in fighting in the Eastern DRC.
All right. I'll ask you, Professor Midamba, at this point. Some of what we've seen in this agreement was negotiated by SADC and EAC heads of state in February. The UN, still in February, the UN Security Council passed resolutions on some of what they've signed in Washington, which is Kagame's demand that the DRC government not promote the FDLR. In exchange, the Rwandese government pull its troops out of DRC, as well as stop supporting the M23. So these are things we've seen across all these resolutions. Why haven't they stuck? What distinguishes this Washington Peace and Prosperity Accords? Is it the promise of investment?
No. Well, that is part of the story. Part of the story, just go back a little bit. And remember, this war has been fought since it was called Zaire, Congo, Zaire, and now DRC. Patrice Lumumba, everybody have died in that thing. So people don't trust each other. They believe nothing will work. We have tried Nairobi deal, Luanda deal. It didn't work. The problem and the difference between this deal is several. One is you separate the M23 from the main antagonist, which are nation state, DRC and Rwanda, who that need to see eye to eye. And you focus on their differences, element by element. And then this time is backed by a superpower, a country that can make things happen, can provide aid, can provide support, but can also punish the people who are fighting. So people know that this is a very serious deal. Now, so then, because the attempt in the past is to bring everybody together, let's just all unite together and feel good. No, that does not work. Because there were people who were serious about the deal. Then there were people for their own interest, on personal, own country interest, pulling the deal down. So now they're separated. You got the country agreement. Then you really, element by element, go through M23 and their needs and all that. And then find out that their M23 need is consistent with Rwanda. Rwandese need. And therefore, it will be easier then to bring the whole region together because of harmony, or you have a regional harmony. Then you have Kenya playing a very active role, active and consistent role. So that combination is what is different.
Okay. Jason, let me ask you this, because you mentioned the regional economic integration framework. While in Washington, the DRC did sign a partnership agreement with the U.S., and part of what is involved is the DRC will supply copper, cobalt, zinc, and other critical minerals to the U.S. through the Lobito corridor. There was an agreement signed with China in 2008, essentially infrastructure for minerals. How do you anticipate China will take this news?
Well, I think it's important to understand that what the U.S. government is doing under Trump, but also under Biden, is really focusing on supply chains in Africa. This is a new push, and I think the professor alluded to this, that the U.S. is being motivated. We're switching from an anti-terrorism focus in Africa, which was a predominant focus after 9/11, to an anti-China focus in Africa. And because the DRC is such an important country in terms of minerals, it's the largest producer of cobalt, which you need in electric vehicle batteries in the world. It supplies around 60% or over 60% of the world's cobalt. And it's the largest producer of copper, which you need in almost all electronics in Africa. And so the DRC is an extremely important country, and most of those supply chains, most of those mines are controlled currently by Chinese companies. And so the U.S., since Biden really has been very interested in muscling its way into those supply chains. And the reason, there's no doubt that the reason that the U.S. is interested in trying to negotiate this deal is to increase its influence in the DRC. And in fact, from the DRC's point of view, They would like to see U.S. involvement in their mining supply chain, in their mining sector, in return for getting the U.S. to pressure Rwanda to withdraw from the Eastern Congo. That's the deal the Congolese would like to see. It's not clear to me that they'll get there with the Americans, but we are certainly in a new phase of geopolitical competition, and the Congo is at the heart of that. Now, you asked me what the Chinese reaction is going to be. I think they're going to wait and see to what degree the Congolese will actually do this, to what degree U.S. companies, as President Trump just said, will really get involved in the DRC. It's a very difficult place to get involved. The Chinese companies are deeply entrenched in the DRC. They have very strong connections with the president and the president's family. And so I think they're probably going to just wait and see if this really will happen, or if this is just aspirational and not much will come of it. So my guess is they'll take a wait and see approach. All
right. Before Professor Midamba, I ask you to make some final remarks. Jason, there are numerous non-state armed groups in the eastern DRC. Do you expect the Nairobi process led by former President Uhuru Kenyatta to proceed?
I'm sorry, could you say that again? I didn't quite get the question.
I'm asking, there are numerous non-state armed groups in the eastern DRC. There has been the Nairobi process led by former President Uhuru Kenyatta seeking to address that. Do you expect that that will proceed?
So I think what's going to happen now is you'll have the Washington, we're working, now the next step really is to push through the Washington process. The Washington process is focusing on the disarmament of the FDLR, these Rwandan rebels, and in return for that, the withdrawal of Rwandan troops. That's one process. The second process is the Doha process. The Doha process is supposed to lead to a signing of a deal between the M23 and the Congolese government. If the Doha process succeeds at getting a deal between those two sides, that will then transition into a larger implementation deal that in effect could lead us back to some of the same figures, for example, former President Kenyatta and others for implementation. What the U.S. would like to see is for the African Union to step in the implementation phase. And there is something called the 4+5 process. There's been President Faure Gnassingbé of Togo has been named as a key facilitator in that process, and there are 5 former presidents or former heads of state, including Uhuru Kenyatta, who are supposed to assist him in that. So if the Doha process does succeed, I do expect the African Union and former presidents such as Kenyatta to take a much larger role in that.
All right. Lastly, Professor Midamba, as he concluded his remarks, President William Ruto called on Trump to get involved in the Sudan situation. Do you anticipate that will happen?
Well, just understand why people are fighting. They're not fighting because they just like to fight. People are fighting to get goods out of Africa. They're hauling gold, by stocks out of Sudan. Sudan is proposing to give them Russia a navy base that is on the work. Is the U.S. going to allow that navy base close to the Swiss? And so the issue is, and this is the most delicate part we're getting into. Yes, there is a discussion that took place in Washington that has a lot of promise, I can tell you. There's a discussion that has taken place in Doha, which is different, but it is a value addition to this. And therefore, what is important, Kenya has played a fundamental major role and consistent role. So what does Africa need at this point, and particular Kenya? We need a stability in the Great Lakes region. We need Tanzania, you need Uganda, Rwanda, DRC, all getting along, and we're focusing on the business of the human need, healthcare, other things. We need strength, the image of Kenya, because President Uhuru was involved. We sent troops there. Now, President Ruto is actively involved in settling this. So stability in DRC, strengthen the East Africa community, strengthen the African Union. As we move ahead. Let me just say one more thing. So Kenya will expand and will benefit out of the trade. Tanzania will benefit, Uganda will benefit, everybody will benefit out of this one.
So a welcome development.
Remember that DRC has estimated $24 trillion worth of mineral, and fertile land, timber, and DRC alone can feed the entire continent of Africa.
Wow.
But it needs to be stable. You need to have a government that's reliable, that people respect.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Noah Midamba, Professor of Defense and Foreign Policy, and joining us from Addis Ababa virtually. We've been joined by Jason Stearns, who is an Associate Professor of International Relations, has authored 2 books on the conflict in the DRC, and was coordinator of a UN group of experts on the conflict there. We take a break, but here's what's coming up.